Fallout Equestria the Chrysalis, Chapter 12, Covert Methods. 2 weeks. That's how long it's been since the whole Sunshine and Rainbows events. And that's also how long it had been since I woken up from my centuries-long slumber. The day I'd met Starlight, and the day of the weather control towers exploding upon activation. That explosion had sent debris across the countryside, including to a certain CLT facility. A facility that had coincidentally suffered a failure of its power systems at that very moment, prompting an emergency evacuation for the one surviving being within. Me. It was a sobering thought, but everything I knew. I had survived through pure chance, and a fairly slim one at that. Had the precise chain of events not occurred, how long might I have remained in the Chrysalis? Would I have ever woken up, or would I have met the same fate as my sisters? Mostly, I just tried to ignore the thoughts. They were depressing, and at the moment, I needed to participate in the festivities. The ponies in Cinder Blocks Inn were the high spirits with the news of Celestia's survival. Sure, she was somehow bound to the SPP hub, however that worked, but she was alive, and so those ponies were quite happy to celebrate that fact. Myself, I was quite happy to join in as well, sharing in the happiness and siphoning off a tiny bit of that camaraderie and friendship that filled the air. I did my best to ignore how utterly strange the whole situation was. 2 weeks in, the equestrian wasteland had done wonders to further develop my ability to simply accept things that I didn't really understand. The whole world had gone crazy, and I had no option but to just roll with it. Starlight joined in too, dancing with the music in a way that left much to be desired in form, but certainly wasn't lacking for energy. Dusty kicked back with a few ponies that he knew, swapping stories. Even Sickle. She shed her armor to join in, to rather mixed results. I stayed well clear, especially as she soon had a small gathering of rowdier ponies, as well as an excess of alcohol and a general lack of common decency. Fortunately, she headed out with them before she got us all kicked out. Despite getting a fairly good meal out of the gathering, I turned in a little early. I had plans for the night and I needed my rest. I napped, waking only as ponies returned to our shared room. Starlight was the first, returning shortly after I had arrived. Sickle was the last, returning well after dark. Her hoof falls came unevenly as she staggered back to her cot and collapsed with a groan. The smell hit me almost immediately, with a stench of alcohol nearly masking the musky scents lingering behind it. She was snoring only moments later. I suppose I should mention that her snoring is much like everything else she does, excessively loud and grating, and it seemed to be made even worse with the amount of alcohol she had consumed that night. If there was one small upside to Sickle's presence, it was that her snoring was perfectly concealed with what little sound I made as I slipped out of the room. Some ponies would think that the best time to sneak into a place would be the middle of the night. That couldn't be further from the truth. The best time to sneak into a place is in the middle of the day, when things are the busiest, when ponies are coming and going constantly, and when something is always going on. When they expect ponies rather than their presence being unexpected. When a disguised changeling is simply one more face in the crowd rather than the only pony around. So, while I made my move at night, I did so out of necessity rather than desirability. Fortunately, I had one very notable advantage. Unlike the ponies living in Merford, I could fly. I skimmed low over the rooftops in my temporary guise, a navy blue Pegasus stallion, light and lean. I had only a small amount of gear weighing me down, my portable terminal tucked into a bag that had previously carried our loot, and the holster holding my pistol and spare magazines. Oh, and my binoculars. The first step of any infiltration is gathering intelligence. I already saw a little of the internal layout of the town hall, enough to know the basic layout of the first 2 floors. While that included my objective, I had plenty of time to scope out the place. There was no rush. I landed atop the tallest building, an old 5-story office building that appeared to be converted into stores and apartments. From there, I had a good view of the town hall building through the lenses of my binoculars. That included the window to Big Gun's office, which was lit, though the worn blinds were closed and I could see the occasional shadow of movement here and there. After a couple of minutes, I just decided that it was time to get closer. I stepped off the edge of the building, the wind rushing past me as I fell, and pulled out to dive to skim low over the neighboring buildings. The last stretch was straight across the street, and then I landed atop the town hall. I peeked back over the edge. No pony was around to have seen me. Again, I just slipped over the edge of the roof, but this time my wings beat to keep my descent low, until I hovered just beside the window. While I couldn't very well sneak in while the room was occupied, I could always eavesdrop. Though muffled through old glass and worn blinds, I could hear Wild Runner's voice.
They just ain't selling as well as they used to. Said he's getting more and more ponies trying to haggle or scrape up more caps to get rifling, and the old ones aren't even moving.
Big Gun's voice sounded quite pleased, perhaps even smug. That would be a market saturation, my dear. The old smooth bores have become common, so ponies look for a hoof upon their neighbor and are looking towards something better. I'll pass word on to Good Deal to reduce the price for the smooth bores and bump up the price for rifled pipes. And I think it'll be time for Forge to put more focus onto the production of proper weapons. If the trend continues, demand should be increasing soon enough.
I'm still glad that you like all this business management stuff. I think I'd have to slit my own throat if I had to listen to Deal rambling on about margins and sales incentives.
There was a short pause, followed by a muted laugh.
Nah, actually, I'd probably just slit his throat.
No, Big Gun said, suppressing a chuckle. Don't be too hard on the help. They're just trying to replace, and there are plenty of other ponies that deserve it more.
Yeah, I know,
Wild Runner said, her tone sharp and bitter.
Except, you're keeping me here instead of letting me deal with them. I am bored. I liked it more before we had Fireline working for us.
This again. A chair squeaked against the floor, followed by the faint sounds of hooves, which stopped a moment later. There are a lot more skulls in need of cracking, my dear. I can't expect you to cover every aspect of our growing little empire.
How about any?
Patience. You'll have plenty of opportunity for fun soon enough. As I've said so many times tonight, let Fireline earn his keep by disposing of this annoying little morale crusader. If you must know, I've got something much more entertaining in store for you, if you're willing to just be a little bit patient. There was a moment of silence. When Wild Runner spoke again, there was a hint of eager amusement to her voice.
Oh, entertaining now? Well, come on, spill it.
And ruin the surprise, my dear? Big Gun chuckled. I think not.
Yeah, you and surprises. A hint then?
I heard Big Gun hum softly. No, I'm afraid not. I wouldn't want to go spoiling your birthday present after all. There was a thump and a rattle, as if some pony had just bumped firmly against the desk. Wild Runner practically cooed, barely audible through the window.
Oh, a birthday present, huh?
Indeed, and that's all you're getting out of me until then. A moment of silence followed by a louder rattle from the desk.
You jackass,
Wild Runner said, though she nearly laughed as she did so.
This better be a damn good surprise.
I'm sure you'll have more fun than I'll want to know about.
Tease.
More hoof steps later.
And you better wrap up all your business shit nice and quick. I'll be waiting for you.
A door opened and shut. There were a few more hoof steps, then the sound of the chair squeaking again. I took that as my cue to leave. As satisfying as it would have been to wait until he left and break into his terminal, it was no longer necessary. While I didn't have any specifics, there was a fairly limited number of ways to dispose of a pony. I skimmed the rooftops, returning to the inn. I woke up to soft morning light, feeling remarkably relaxed and rested. The aching in my legs had slipped off into the background, and for the moment, I felt content. The peace was eventually broken by Sickle's groan and the loud rattling of bottles clinking against each other. She muttered in a barely audible voice and mostly incoherent fragments.
Fucking... Where's that dumb bottle?
I cracked open an eye to see her lean over the edge of her cot, fumbling with a bag with one hoof. Her eyes were thin slits, barely opened, and her ears were laid back against her skull. The side of her face was wet, probably with drool. On my opposite side, Starlight stirred and groaned.
What's going on now? Need a drink,
Sickle muttered, finally extracting a bottle from the bag and sending a few more rolling across the floor. She flopped back into her cot, sprawling out onto her back in a way that made it especially lewd by the way her coat was matted in certain places. She pried the bottle cap off with her teeth, spat it out, and proceeded to start chugging the bottle. She'd even managed to do it without spilling too much of her drink.
Now you're getting drunk again, really?
Starlight said, grumbling a little as she sat up and rubbed the sleep from her eyes.
And history repeats. Hey, fuck you.
Sickle muttered as she lowered the bottle, squinting against the light.
Drinking fixes hangovers. Besides, I had a great fucking night, unlike your lame asses. I had plenty of fun,
Starlight said, stretching.
And, unlike a certain pony, I did it without a massive headache in the morning.
Sickle, however, had stopped paying attention. She was looking off into the distance, eyes opened a little more as she steadily blinked. Then she cracked a smile.
Well, shit, I just made a pun. That was a pun, right? Great fucking night.
She broke down in snickering, which soon developed into a groan as she laid her head back.
Clever,
Starlight dryly intoned before hopping off of her cot, landing onto the floor with a sharp clatter of hooves and drawing a small wince from Sickle.
Well, I thought it was funny.
Sickle groaned, though a moment later she started to smile.
Been way too fucking long since I've had a good rut.
She tipped the bottle back again, draining the last of its contents and then dropped it beside her cot.
Shit, almost makes me miss my old crew. Of course it took most of them to do a half-decent job of it. Really? I don't need to be hearing all of this?
Starlight said, which just made Sickle snicker more.
What? Jealous?
Sickle grinned, spreading her hind legs wider.
You know, I'm up for another round or two if you're that desperate.
I turned so I wasn't looking at Sickle anymore and started slowly gathering my things. On the far end of the room, Dusty was already up, casting the occasional disapproving look down the room as he finished reassembling his rifle. He already had his gear ready to go. Starlight grunted.
No.
She glanced past me towards Sickle, grimaced, and looked away again.
And if you're gonna keep that up, the least you could do is clean up. That's just disgusting. See?
Sickle grunted.
You're all a bunch of lame asses.
She groaned a bit more, and from the creaking of her cot, I could tell that she had sat up.
How hard is it to find ponies that like to fuck as much as they like to fight?
Starlight turned back to her.
Hey, I don't like to fight. It's just a job.
I looked back to see Sickle wincing, rubbing a hoof against an ear.
Yeah, sure you don't.
She rumbled.
You just really like your job, huh? I don't.
Dusty cut in. Children, that's enough. We've only got an hour before we're meeting with Fireline, so why don't you all get some breakfast before we head out? And Sickle, go clean up. Right now some pony could shoot you by scent.
Eat a dick,
Sickle muttered. Uh-huh. Better make it quick if you don't want to miss the fun. While she grumbled and rubbed at her eyes, Dusty slung his freshly assembled rifle and stood to leave. It seemed the best time to speak up.
Oh, Dusty, just so you know, this is absolutely a trap. Big Gun intends Fireline to dispose of us. Well, no, he specified you, but I'm assuming it's a package deal.
Dusty hesitated, giving me a questioning look. And how exactly would you know that? I shrugged as nonchalantly as possible.
Because while you were preoccupied last night, I sneaked out and eavesdropped on Big Gun and Wild Runner, and they discussed various aspects of their business, including how to deal with us.
He stared, eyes widening for a moment before blurting. You... what?
Also, I get the impression that Wild Runner isn't exactly the most pleasant of ponies.
Yeah, she's not, Dusty said, turning to face me with an angry narrowing of his eyes. She's the kind of pony who likes stomping in the heads of ponies that she catches, eavesdropping on her. What the hell were you even thinking? Do you have any idea how dangerous that is?
Yes,
I replied.
I wasn't acting impulsively or incautiously, if that's what you're thinking. I carefully considered every aspect of potential risk and my own abilities, and took a course of action that was certain that I was safe for all of us. I could also point out that it went precisely well as I expected it to.
This time, maybe, Dusty shot back. But if you keep trying to play at being a spy like you're in some sort of ancient book you read, you're gonna get yourself and all of us in trouble.
I'm not playing at anything, Dusty. We all have our own skills.
I pointed a hoof at him.
You're a soldier.
I set my hoof down again and gave a little smile.
I'm not.
He glared at me, mulling over my statement for several seconds before replying. You know what? Fine. But you're also a part of a team right now, and that means you don't go running off to do your own thing. The fallout from anything you do is gonna land on all of us, so don't you ever go cutting us all out of it again. Got it?
As long as you don't dismiss us out of hoof and give actual consideration towards our skills and expertise.
I held out a hoof.
Deal?
He had to consider it for a few more moments before taking my hoof and giving it a quick shake. So long as your idea of your own skills match reality. Considering the risk you took for nothing, I'm not terribly impressed, so far. My smile grew a bit more as I picked up my saddlebags, slinging them over my back.
Oh, it was not for nothing. In fact, I think what we've gotten out of it will be quite valuable.
So, what, that this is a trap? We already knew that.
No, we didn't. We suspected. Strongly suspected, but still only suspected.
I slipped the sling of my rifle over to my neck, then paused to look square at him.
What we did get out of it is complete freedom from any lingering concerns that we might be about to aggressively interrogate an innocent and uninvolved pony.
He frowned, eventually shaking his head. I don't know if that's worth the risk you took. We'll find out soon enough anyway.
And I think every pony will be considerably more comfortable with the plan with this knowledge.
Sickle grumbled from nearby, a hoof still laying across her eyes.
I don't actually give a shit, one way or the other. Every pony other than Sickle, then.
Dusty sighed, shaking his head again. Fine, no point complaining about it now, since we already went and did it anyway.
Indeed.
I said, smiling again.
Now, this is the time for more productive things, like breakfast.
Dusty was still a little bit grumpy by the time we arrived at Mereford South Gate, passing through the thin morning crowd. The sight that met us didn't improve his mood anymore. Fireline was there, sitting back against the wall. What we hadn't expected was the 4 armed ponies gathering around him, decked out with saddlebags and weapons. Good weapons too, like the ones that the militia used. Well, shit. Dusty grumbled under his breath as we continued to walk towards them. Starlight leaned in.
Change of plans?
Dusty thought on it for a moment before shaking his head and murmuring back. Plan stays. As long as we draw first, we're good.
I don't know,
Starlight said, and I had to agree.
Weren't you just talking about unnecessary risks?
I asked, keeping my voice low. While we were still a good ways away, we didn't want one of the occasional ponies passing by to overhear our plans to abduct one of their employed mercenaries. Dusty shook his head slightly. We'll be starting with Sickle, in close quarters with all of them. He glanced back to her, speaking up just loud enough for her to hear. I'll get your attention just before it all goes down, and you can lay out whichever one is closest to you, alright? Sickle was naturally in her armor once again. I wouldn't really describe her appearance at the time as, well, clean, so much as cleaner, or at least cleaned up to the point where it was no longer blatantly obvious what she had been doing the night before.
Sounds fun,
she rumbled. All signs of her hangover had passed some time ago.
I'll take the closest 3. You cunts should be able to finish off the leftovers, right?
Just don't kill Fireline, Dusty said. Don't maim him either. In fact, I'd prefer if you didn't kill any pony at all.
Oh, yeah,
Sickle said, snorting out a quiet chuckle.
'Cause I give 2 shits what you would prefer.
Starlight rolled her eyes.
Yeah, this isn't going to go wrong or anything. Yeah, fuck you too, Runt.
Sickle sneered and added.
Besides, we outnumber them. There are 5 of them!
Starlight said, staring up flatly at Sickle.
There are only 4 of us. Yeah, but I'm worth at least 3 of them.
Sickle replied, grinning behind her muzzle.
That's not how outnumbering works,
Starlight grumbled. Okay, quiet down, Dusty said. We were getting close, and the ponies we were approaching had taken note of us. Fireline was geared up like his companions, having donned armored barding and with an assault rifle slung across his chest. He stood as we approached. Good morning, he said, eyeing over each of us in turn. It was a calculating look, I thought. He was sizing us up. Good morning, Dusty said, and he even sounded moderately pleasant about it. The furthest mercenary, a green stallion, leaned over to his nearest companion and spoke in a hushed but clearly audible voice. Holy shit. That's one big bitch. Sickle focused on him like a laser.
You better watch out, Shrimp. Tiny little thing like you might get stepped on.
He sneered back. Yeah, that's enough, Fireline said, shooting the mercenary a harsh glare. Save the comments for later. It was Sickle's turn to sneer.
Yeah, listen to your boss, you little bitch.
Fireline shot her the same glare, but said nothing more before turning back to Dusty. So, you're ready to go then? We are, Dusty said, nodding and giving a little smile. Lead the way. I caught a moment of hesitation from Fireline before he nodded. I don't think he liked the idea of any of us being behind him. Okay, alright. Let's go. With a wave from Fireline, the gate slowly opened. Dusty took the opportunity to chamber around and ensure his rifle was ready to go. I did the same, acting as casual as I could, and locked my rifle's bolt back. Starlight merely smirked. Her lancer was slung loosely across her back, but her holstered recharger was only a momentary thought away. Fireline looked back, glancing down to our rifles before speaking. No need to worry about that. If anything does come up, my team can keep us safe. Dusty just shrugged. Well, better safe than sorry. I did my best to seem disarming.
We really wouldn't want to be freeloaders when we can help.
Uh-huh, Fireline said, frowning just a tiny bit before hiding the expression. Just be careful where you point those things. Once the gate had opened up, we had set out, hooves slowly beating against the cracked pavement and dry earth. It wasn't the most conversational traveling group I had ever encountered. That was hardly surprising, though, I suppose. When both sides intended violence upon the other, if anything, it was surprising that there wasn't more tension there. On the plus side, this gave me plenty of time to evaluate the ponies that we were traveling with. While Fireline led the way, the 4 ponies with him had fanned out, taking up the sides of our little formation. It had the simple effect of making it look like they were protecting us, while in fact, surrounding us. On the left, closest to myself, was a violet mare. She was wrapped up in a thick cloth over her barding, which left very little of her being visible. She was also the only one of the formation who kept her attention entirely focused outward, rather than glancing in to check on us. In front of her, by Dusty, was a lean young buck, the only unicorn other than Fireline. His gear was clean and neat. From the hints of dirt ground into his off-white coat, I got the impression that his gear was new, rather than fastidiously maintained. He was also quite alert as well, possibly too alert, with his ears constantly flicking back and forth, and he would regularly glance into the group before immediately looking outward once again. To the right beside Sickle was the largest of the mercenaries, a dark brown stallion who would have looked moderately big and strong beside any pony else in our group. He looked almost bored as he walked along, though his gear was worn and scratched up in places, and there were a few additions that caught my attention. Instead of a pistol, he had a small shotgun holstered at his side. A few bulging pouches held what looked to be drum magazines for his rifle, but he didn't have any of them loaded. Instead, he had a regular magazine in it, although the one with a thin band of red ribbon tied around it. My immediate suspicion was that it indicated the magazine was loaded with a special kind of ammo, maybe. Behind him was a green stallion who had spoken up earlier. Of the entire group, he was the only one who actually completely acted casual. He hummed to himself on occasion, and was often smiling. It wasn't a good smile, though. It was the kind of smile, like a smug smile, a pony gets when he knows something no pony else does. His smile slipped back only minutes into our journey as he sniffed the air. He sniffed a few more times before leaning in closer to Sickle's flanks and sniffed again. Sickle didn't even look back as she growled.
Unless you're about to eat me out, you better back the fuck off before your face gets fucking broken.
He gave an amused snort as he returned to his place, wearing that smug smile once again. Rather than heading back the way we had come to the city, our course took us east, first along Mereford's walls under the protective eyes of the militia guards, and then out into the crumbling suburban ruins on the outskirts of Dodge City. A few buildings still stood near Mereford, having likely been torn down for materials long ago, but the skeletal remains of the old city grew more prominent as we got further down from town. We walked down the cracked remains of a wide paved street, some old thoroughfare that had run through the ruined neighborhood. Even close to a mile away, we could still see Mereford's walls behind us, but that was soon to change. As we passed more and more buildings, we were quickly approaching the point where we would pass out of sight. That knowledge came with an acidic twinge in my gut, a hint of adrenaline at what was soon to come. Dusty made no attempt to hide his wary glances around the buildings we passed, eventually taking a bit of his rifle between his teeth. So, how much trouble have you guys been having with the Manicores lately? Not a bit, Fireline said, glancing back. His eyes dipped down to Dusty's rifle before adding, "Relax. We drove the last of them off last year, and we sweep through every month or two to make sure it's clear. Gotta keep the roads safe for traders, right?" Uh-huh. Right, Dusty agreed, giving a little sigh and visibly relaxing, though he kept the bit in his mouth. I'm glad to hear it. Never really did like the stretch anyway. I had to give Dusty credit. He was a decent actor at times. The silence returned as we continued on, passing an old, burnt-out restaurant. The road curved along its front before opening into an old city square. It might have been beautiful once, but now the benches were broken, the plants withered, and the grand statue at its center was reduced to 4 hooves surrounded by rubble. The curve also led us out of sight in the distance of Mereford's walls. That led me to look at our escort once more. As I was walking behind Dusty, the easiest to look at was the young unicorn beside him. That's the only reason I caught the simple action that initiated everything. While his rifle was slung across his chest, his horn was lit, his magic holding the weapon's grips. With the jostling of his equipment, I would have never picked out the sound of him disengaging his safety, nor would I have seen it if it had not been me looking right at it. Dusty spoke. "Oh, hey, Sickle." Her head turned around towards him.
What?
Rather than answering, his head immediately turned away. His rifle swung around towards the young unicorn, and all hell broke loose. Even expecting a confrontation, the loudness of his rifle made me jerk back. To my side, Sickle was already moving, throwing herself into the fight before I had even taken up my own weapon. Dusty's rifle swung around the violet mare beside me before I could bring mine to bear. He yelled, she moved, another assaultive sound hammered at my ears as Dusty's rifle blared. She twisted, then fell. I staggered back, turning the other way. Fireline staggered sideways towards us, blood falling from his snout. Starlight had a repeater out, aimed at the air at no pony. The green stallion lay several yards past her, writhing and holding his blood-soaked face. The final mercenary was mostly hidden behind Sickle's bulk, and I could only see one of his hind legs, jerking and twitching, as Sickle turned and one of her spiked hooves rose up, dripping with blood. I didn't notice Fireline's rifle lying onto the ground, likely having fallen there since at the same time moments his nose had been bloodied, until his magic grabbed it again. I swung my rifle back towards him, yelling out what I had intended as a warning, but which came out as an incoherent shout of raw noise. Dusty also shouted, likely much more coherently than myself, though in the heat of the moment I missed whatever he said. Sickle moved quicker than all of us. She reared around, smashing one hoof down on the rifle. The other bloodied hoof caught Fireline onto the top of the head and shoved his face into the pavement.
Sit the fuck down!
She bellowed, loud enough that I remembered it clearly even over the jarring amount of adrenaline pumping through me. The whole fight couldn't even have lasted more than a couple of seconds. Starlight muttered a string of profanity as she quickly looked around, turning a repeater towards the green stallion, who did little more than moan and curl up. I didn't get a good look at his face between his legs, obscuring it, and my lack of desire to see what a buck from Sickle could do to a pony's snout. All I saw was blood. As Sickle leaned over Fireline, chuckling, Starlight finally broke her quiet tirade of curses to look towards Dusty.
What happened to not kill—
She was interrupted by the most terrifying sounds I'd ever heard. The sound was loud and sharp, yet seemingly without end. It wasn't a single gunshot or even the rapid cracking of an automatic rifle. It was less than a string of distinct sounds and more of a tone. A horrible, tremendous sound that tore through the air just as 100 bullets tore into the area around Sickle, throwing up sprays of dirt, shattered pavements, and blood. Sickle fell,